My son cut me off for years, then wanted me to pay for his dream vacation, so I did this. The smell of fresh coffee and sawdust still takes me back to that Tuesday morning when everything fell apart. I was 54 then, standing in the cramped office above Henderson and Son Hardware, watching my dreams crumble through numbers on a bank statement that didn't lie, even when I desperately wanted them to. 23 years I'd spent building that business from nothing. Started with a $2,000 loan from my late father-in-law and a dream bigger than my 2-car garage workshop. By the time my son Jake turned 25, we had 3 locations across Franklin County, 12 full-time employees, and enough steady customers to make me believe I'd finally given my boy something worth inheriting. Henderson and Son. That sign meant everything to me. The and Son part was my pride talking, I suppose. Jake had worked summers with me since he was 16, reluctantly at first, but I thought he was coming around. He'd learned the inventory system, could fix a lawnmower engine blindfolded, and had that easy charm with customers that I never possessed. When he graduated college with a business degree, I foolishly believed we'd finally found our rhythm. "Dad, I want to handle more of the financial side," he'd said just 3 months before that awful Tuesday. "Let me take some pressure off you." I should have seen the warning signs. Jake's expensive new truck. Designer clothes that cost more than most of our employees made in a week. His vague explanations about investment opportunities and side projects. But when your only child shows interest in the family business after years of seeming ashamed of it, you don't ask too many questions. You just feel grateful. The morning everything unraveled, I arrived early as usual, keys jingling in the pre-dawn quiet. That's when I found the note on my desk, written in Jake's messy scrawl. "Dad had to take care of some things. We'll explain later. Jay." My hands were shaking by the time I finished reading the bank statements. $38,000. Gone. Transferred out in careful increments over 6 weeks, each withdrawal just small enough to avoid triggering automatic alerts. Money earmarked for payroll, for rent, for the suppliers who trusted the Henderson name for over 2 decades. Jake's phone went straight to voicemail. His apartment was empty, lease terminated. His girlfriend, Sarah, claimed she hadn't heard from him in days, but her eyes wouldn't meet mine. By 9 a.m., I had to face my employees, good people who'd shown up expecting their paychecks. Mary Chen, my bookkeeper, had 2 kids in college. Tommy Rodriguez was saving for his wedding. Old Pete Miller was 3 years from retirement, counting on every dollar. "There's been a complication with payroll," I announced in our tiny break room, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "I'm working to resolve it, but your checks will be delayed." The questions came fast. The suspicion. The slow, awful realization spreading across faces I'd known for years. Some of these people had trusted me with their livelihoods, and now they were wondering if they'd been fools to do so. Within a week, the story spread through our tight-knit community like wildfire. "Henderson's boy cleaned out the business. Old man Henderson can't manage his own money. That's what happens when you mix family with business." I remortgaged my house to cover payroll. Sold my truck and bought a 15-year-old Honda. Took out every credit card I could qualify for. 3 employees quit anyway, said they couldn't risk working for someone who might not be able to pay them. I understood, but it cut deep. The worst part wasn't the money, though that nearly killed the business. It wasn't even the shame of having to explain to vendors why our payments were late, or watching neighbors whisper when I walked past. The worst part was lying awake at 3 a.m., wondering where I'd failed as a father. Wondering if my son was safe, if he was eating, if he ever thought about the mess he'd left behind. Sarah finally called 6 months later, drunk and crying. Jake was in California, she said, living with some older woman he'd met online. Bragging about his fresh start, and how he'd finally escaped his father's small-town prison. That's what he'd called the life I'd spent decades building. I never heard from him directly. No apology. No explanation. No acknowledgement that he'd destroyed more than money. He'd shattered trust, relationships, and whatever naive faith I'd had in unconditional love. But here's what Jake didn't know. couldn't have predicted in his selfish calculation, the betrayal didn't break me. It forged me into something harder, more determined. I worked 18-hour days to rebuild what he'd stolen. I diversified, modernized, and eventually expanded into commercial contracting. By my 57th birthday, Henderson Hardware had not only recovered, it was thriving beyond anything I'd originally imagined. The "and son" sign came down that first year. Just Henderson Hardware now. Cleaner. More honest. I kept one photo of Jake on my desk, him at 18, grinning beside his first car, a used Camaro we'd fixed up together over an entire summer. Some mornings I'd catch myself staring at it, remembering how proud he'd looked, how we'd laughed when the engine finally roared to life. Then I'd get back to work, building something that couldn't be stolen by someone I'd trusted with everything. 3 years passed like that. 3 years of success, stability, and a hole in my chest shaped like the son who'd chosen money over everything we could have been together. That's when Jake decided to come home. The first year after Jake's betrayal, I lived on 3 hours of sleep and gas station coffee. Every morning at 4:30 a.m., I dragged myself to the shop, spending the quiet hours before opening doing the books, calling suppliers, and planning the day's survival strategy. By 6 a.m., I was on the floor helping customers. By 8 p.m., I was still there, teaching myself commercial building codes from outdated textbooks I'd bought at a library sale. Mary Chin, bless her heart, had stayed through the worst of it. She'd watched me wolf down a bologna sandwich at my desk during what should have been lunch, shaking her head like a concerned aunt. "Mr. Henderson, you can't keep this pace forever," she'd say. But forever felt like the only option I had. The turning point came 18 months in, when Bob Patterson from Patterson Construction walked through my doors with a problem. His regular supplier had screwed up a massive order for a new strip mall going up on Route 9, wrong gauge wire, delayed delivery, the whole mess. He needed someone who could source industrial electrical supplies fast and get them delivered by Thursday. "I'll figure it out," I told him, though I had no idea how. I spent that entire Tuesday night on the phone with suppliers across 3 states, calling in every favor I'd built up over 2 decades. By Wednesday evening, I had 2 flatbed trucks pulling into Patterson's site with exactly what he needed. Bob handed me a check for $18,000, more profit than I'd made in the previous 4 months combined. "You just saved my contract," he said, shaking my calloused hand. "Next time I need something industrial, you're my first call." That handshake changed everything. Within 6 months, I'd carved out a niche as the go-to supplier for contractors who needed someone reliable, someone who understood that their deadlines meant everything. I learned to speak their language, rebar specifications, commercial-grade lumber, bulk hardware orders that made my old retail sales look like pocket change. The residential hardware side kept the lights on, but commercial contracting made me rich. Not flashy rich. I still drove that beat-up Honda and lived in the same modest ranch house I'd bought when Jake was 10. But quietly, steadily, impressively rich. By year 2, I'd paid off every debt Jake's theft had created. By year 3, I was buying properties, small commercial buildings that I'd renovate and lease to other businesses. Nothing fancy, just solid investments that generated steady income while I slept. The kind of boring, practical wealth building that Jake had always rolled his eyes at during our old dinner table conversations about playing it safe. Mary had to hire an assistant just to handle our expanded accounting. "Mr. Henderson," she said one afternoon, showing me our quarterly reports, "you realize you're making more money than some of the big chain stores now?" I did realize it. What surprised me was how little satisfaction it brought. Success, I learned, tastes different when there's no one to share it with. Sure, I felt proud watching contractors depend on Henderson Hardware for their biggest projects. I felt vindicated when competitors who'd whispered about my family troubles started trying to poach my commercial clients. But every evening, I'd come home to an empty house and microwave a frozen dinner, wondering what the point of building an empire was if you had no heir to leave it to. I'd started keeping a bottle of good whiskey in my kitchen cabinet, not to drink away sorrows, but to toast small victories that felt hollow without witness. The night I signed the lease for my fourth rental property, I poured 2 fingers of bourbon and sat at my kitchen table, staring at Jake's old high school graduation photo on the refrigerator. "You could have had all of this," I whispered to the smiling 18-year-old in the picture. "We could have built this together." The hardest part wasn't the loneliness, though. It was the success itself. Every smart decision I made, every profitable deal I closed, felt like evidence of what Jake had thrown away. I'd proven I was more than the small-town hardware store owner he'd been embarrassed by. I'd become exactly the kind of successful businessman he claimed to respect in other people's fathers. But he wasn't there to see it. Sometimes I'd catch myself planning to call him, to share news about a particularly good month or a new opportunity. Then I'd remember, Jake had chosen to walk away from Henderson and Son when it was struggling. He'd forfeited any right to celebrate Henderson Hardware's triumph. By my 58th birthday, I employed 23 people across 2 locations, owned 6 rental properties, and had investment accounts that would have made my younger self dizzy with disbelief. I celebrated alone at Applebee's, ordering the same steak dinner I'd eaten there with Jake for his 21st birthday, back when I thought we had a future together. The waitress, probably 25 and reminding me painfully of Jake at that age, asked if I was expecting someone else. "No," I said, cutting into my steak. "Just me." I had no idea that everything was about to change again. That in 3 weeks, my phone would ring with a number I didn't recognize, and a familiar voice would say, "Hey Dad, it's me. We need to talk." The call came on a Thursday evening while I was reviewing invoices in my home office. Unknown California number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Telemarketers had been relentless lately, but something made me answer. "Hey Dad, it's me." 3 years of silence, and that's how Jake chose to break it. Casual. Breezy. Like he just stepped out for cigarettes instead of vanishing with my employees' livelihoods. My hand tightened around the phone. "Jake." "Yeah, hey. How've you been? I heard through the grapevine that the business is doing pretty well these days." The grapevine. As if we lived in the same small town, as if he'd been keeping tabs through mutual friends instead of completely ghosting everyone who'd ever cared about him. "What do you want, Jake?" A pause. Then that laugh, the same dismissive chuckle he'd used as a teenager when caught breaking curfew. "Dad, come on. Can't a son call his father without an ulterior motive? Can he?" Another pause, longer this time. I could hear voices in the background music, the clink of glasses. He was calling from a bar or restaurant, probably trying to impress whoever he was with by casually phoning dear old Dad. "Look, I know things ended weird between us." "Weird?" The word exploded out of me. "You stole $38,000 and disappeared, Jake. That's not weird. That's criminal." "Dad, Jesus, dramatic much? I was 25 and stupid, okay. We all make mistakes when we're young. I figured by now you'd have. Moved past it. Moved past it." Like it was a minor disagreement about curfew instead of 3 years of rebuilding my reputation one difficult conversation at a time. "Besides," Jake continued, his voice gaining that old confident edge, "I heard you're doing really well now. Better than ever, actually. So it all worked out in the end, right?" The audacity was breathtaking. In Jake's mind, my success somehow justified his betrayal, as if stealing from me had been some kind of favor that forced me to reach my potential. "What do you want?" I repeated. "Well, here's the thing, Dad. I've been thinking a lot about family lately, about how life's short and we shouldn't let past stuff keep us apart forever. And I've got this incredible opportunity coming up, a 3-week trip through Europe. Paris, Rome, Amsterdam, the works. It's always been my dream, you know. To see the world, experience different cultures." My jaw clenched. Of course. Of course it wasn't about reconciliation or making amends. It was about money. "Sarah and I are planning to go in September, and the thing is, it's pretty expensive. Like $15,000 for both of us, all included. But Dad, this could be exactly what we need to heal our relationship. A fresh start, you know? And honestly, 15 grand is probably nothing to you these days. Sarah. The same Sarah who'd lied to my face about his whereabouts. They were still together, apparently, still living in whatever fantasy world they'd constructed where actions didn't have consequences. You're calling me for vacation money. Dad, don't make it sound so transactional. This is about us reconnecting. About family. I've been doing a lot of growing these past few years, a lot of soul-searching, and I realize now how well, let's call it your strict parenting style. Maybe pushed me to make some questionable choices back then. My strict parenting style. Suddenly, his theft was my fault for having expectations. You think I was too strict? Dad, come on. Remember how you used to make me work those summers at the store? 12-hour days, minimum wage, while all my friends were at the beach or hanging out. And the way you'd lecture me about responsibility and earning your keep, it felt like you were trying to trap me in that small-town mentality forever. I closed my eyes, remembering those summers differently. Remembering how proud Jake had looked when he'd successfully helped a customer find exactly what they needed. How we'd grab lunch together at the deli across the street, planning improvements to the store layout. How I'd thought we were building something together. So stealing my money was... What? Rebellion? God, Dad, you're still so dramatic. I didn't steal anything. I took some money from a business I was supposed to inherit anyway. It was like an advance on my future, you know? And obviously I always planned to pay it back once I got established out here. The lies were so smooth, so practiced, that I wondered if Jake actually believed them. In his version of events, he wasn't a thief who destroyed trust and nearly bankrupted the family business. He was a misunderstood young man, driven to desperate measures by an overbearing father, finally ready to graciously allow reconciliation, if I'd just write a check. Besides, he continued, $15,000 is literally nothing to someone with your net worth now. I heard you own multiple properties, got your fingers in all sorts of investments. You're probably making more in a month than I took in total. There it was. The real Jake, revealed in his casual assessment of my finances. He'd been researching me, calculating what he thought I was worth, figuring out how much he could reasonably ask for without seeming greedy. The old ache hit me then, that persistent, pathetic hope that somewhere in this conversation, my son might express genuine remorse or interest in rebuilding our relationship for reasons that had nothing to do with my bank account. Jake, I said carefully, do you understand what your actions cost me? Not just the money. The trust one lost with employees, with suppliers, with our community? Dad, that was 3 years ago. Water under the bridge. People forget businesses recover. Look at you now, you're basically rich. If anything, what happened was a blessing in disguise. It forced you to think bigger. A blessing in disguise. My son's betrayal was a blessing in disguise. So what do you say? Can you help us out with this Europe trip? It would mean everything to me, Dad. Everything. I took a long, slow breath, buying myself time to think. Every instinct screamed to hang up, to tell Jake exactly what I thought of his entitled request. But something else stirred in me, curiosity, maybe, or the strategic mind I'd developed over 3 years of careful business decisions. Let me understand this, I said, keeping my voice neutral. You want me to fund a 3-week European vacation for you and Sarah? Exactly. Dad, you get it. I knew you would. Why Europe? Why now? Jake's enthusiasm bubbled through the phone. Are you kidding? It's Europe. The history, the culture, the food. Sarah's always dreamed of seeing the Eiffel Tower, and I want to check out the business scene in Amsterdam, you know, see how entrepreneurs operate over there. It's educational, really. Educational. Right. What kind of business scene? A slight hesitation. Oh, you know, startups, tech companies, that sort of thing. I've got some ideas I'm working on, and international exposure could be huge for my networking. What ideas? Well, they're still in development. But the point is, Dad, this trip could be the catalyst I need to really launch my career. Think of it as an investment in my future. An investment in Jake's future. The same future he'd claimed I was trying to trap him in with my small-town mentality. Tell me about what you've been doing in California. Your job, your plans. Another pause, shorter this time, but I caught it. I'm between opportunities right now, actually. The startup I was with folded. Not my fault, the founder was completely incompetent. But that's given me time to explore my options, you know? Maybe start something of my own. Between opportunities. In other words, unemployed. How long have you been between opportunities? A few months. But Dad, that's why this trip is so perfect timing. I need to recharge, get some perspective, come back with fresh ideas and new contacts. You know how important networking is in business. I knew how important work was in business. How important showing up was. How important not stealing from your employer was. What about Sarah? Is she working? She's figuring things out too. We're both at this crossroads in life where we need to decide what we really want to do with our futures. This trip could help us both gain clarity. Two unemployed people wanting a $15,000 vacation to gain clarity. The picture was becoming clearer by the minute. Jake, level with me. Why can't you pay for this trip yourselves? The pause this time was longer, and when Jake spoke again, his voice had lost some of its easy confidence. Dad, we're young. We're supposed to be living life, experiencing things, not grinding away at some soul-crushing job just to afford basic survival. Money isn't everything, you know? Experiences are what matter. Money paid for the experience of having employees I couldn't pay because of what you did. God, Dad, are you seriously going to keep bringing that up? I told you, I was young and stupid. People change. I've grown a lot since then. How have you grown? I've learned to prioritize what really matters. Like relationships and experiences, and not getting so wrapped up in material success that you forget to actually live. Not getting wrapped up in material success. This from the son who'd driven a $40,000 truck at 25 and was now asking for vacation money. If experiences matter more than money, why do you need my money for this experience? The question hung in the air for a long moment. When Jake finally answered, there was an edge of irritation in his voice. Look, Dad, I'm trying to rebuild our relationship here. I thought you'd be happy to help, especially since, let's be honest, you've got more money than you know what to do with. 15 grand is literally pocket change for you now. After we ended the call, with me promising to think about it, I sat in my home office staring at the phone. Jake hadn't asked about my health, my happiness, or even the details of how the business had recovered. He'd mentioned wanting to reconnect, but hadn't suggested visiting, meeting for dinner, or spending any actual time together. Just wire the money and trust that a European vacation would somehow heal 3 years of betrayal and silence. But I'd spent 3 years learning to investigate before making major decisions. The next morning, I did what any careful businessman would do, research. Jake's social media profiles painted an interesting picture. Photos from expensive restaurants, craft cocktail bars, beach trips to Malibu. Sarah posting about manifestation and living your best life. From what looked like a pretty nice apartment. Not exactly the lifestyle of two people scraping by and saving for their dream trip. I called my old friend Pete Morrison, who'd moved to San Diego 5 years ago. Pete had always been good at finding information. Jake Henderson? Pete said when I explained what I needed. Yeah, I can ask around. Got a few contacts in the LA area. The callback came 2 days later. Bill, you sitting down? Pete's voice was grim. Your boy's got problems. Big ones. Gambling debts, from what I'm hearing. Got mixed up with some online poker sites, then tried to chase his losses at a couple casinos. Word is he owes somewhere north of 20 grand to some guys who aren't particularly patient about repayment. My stomach dropped. How bad? Bad enough that he and his girlfriend had to move apartments twice in the past 4 months. Bad enough that he's been hitting up everyone he knows for loans. The Europe trip? That's not about healing your relationship, Bill. That's about getting out of town until the heat dies down. I hung up feeling sick. Not just about Jake's situation, but about my own naivety. Even after 3 years, even knowing what he'd done to me, I'd still harbored some small hope that this call meant my son was ready to be the man I'd raised him to be. Instead, I was just his latest mark. I called Jake back 3 days later with an invitation that seemed to catch him off guard. How about we meet in person? I'll fly out to California. We can have dinner, talk this through face to face like adults. The surprise in his voice was unmistakable. You'd come out here? Really? Family's important, Jake. Isn't that what you said? We arranged to meet at Morton's Steakhouse in Beverly Hills, Jake's suggestion, naturally. It's got a great atmosphere for serious conversations, he'd said. What he meant was it was expensive enough to reinforce his assumptions about my willingness to spend money on him. I arrived first, wearing my best suit, a charcoal gray number I'd bought for important client meetings. The hostess led me to our table, and I ordered a scotch, top shelf. When Jake walked in 20 minutes late, I watched his face carefully as he took in the scene, his old man, looking every inch the successful businessman, sitting calmly in one of LA's most expensive restaurants. Dad, wow, you look different, Jake said, sliding into the booth across from me. He was thinner than I remembered, with the kind of nervous energy that comes from stress and too much caffeine. Success suits you, does it? I signaled the waiter. Order whatever you want, son. Tonight's on me. Jake's eyes lit up as he scanned the menu, settling on the $48 Wagyu beef. Sarah wasn't with him. She had a thing, he'd said vaguely. More likely, she was smart enough to avoid this conversation. We made small talk through the appetizers. Jake told elaborate stories about California life, name-dropping restaurants and neighborhoods like they were achievements. I listened, nodded, and watched him carefully. He was performing, trying to convince me he'd built something impressive out west. But the performance felt hollow, desperate. So, Jake said as his steak arrived, have you thought about what we discussed? The Europe thing? I have. His fork paused halfway to his mouth. And? First, let me share some things you might not know about how my life has changed since you left. I pulled out my phone, opening the banking app I'd prepared for this moment. Jake's eyes widened as I showed him the account balance. Not my main investment portfolio, just one of my smaller business accounts. 6 figures easy? Dad, holy shit. Is that real? That's just one account, Jake. Henderson Hardware isn't the same little family business you walked away from. I swiped to show him photos of my latest commercial project, a renovation of a 50,000 square foot warehouse complex. I've got 4 locations now, 23 employees, and I'm the primary contractor for half the commercial development in 3 counties. Jake set down his fork, staring. I had no idea you'd. How much are you worth now? More than you assumed when you calculated that 15,000 was pocket change for me. A flush crept up his neck. I never said I calculated. Jake, I leaned forward, my voice quiet but firm. I know about the gambling debts. I know about the guys you owe money to. I know you've moved apartments twice in 4 months and that this Europe trip isn't about healing our relationship. It's about running away from your problems. The color drained from his face. Dad, I don't know what you've heard, but $22,000. That's what my contact in San Diego tells me you owe. Funny coincidence that you asked for 15, just enough to skip town but not enough to make me suspicious about why you really needed it. Jake's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Finally, he found his voice. Okay, yes, I've had some bad luck with investments. Gambling isn't investing, son. But that doesn't change anything. You're rich now, Dad. Richer than we ever dreamed when I was growing up in that tiny house, wearing hand-me-downs, watching you stress about every penny. You can afford to help me, and you know it. There it was. The entitlement I'd been waiting for. You think my success means I owe you something? I think family helps family. I think when your father has more money than he could spend in a lifetime, and your son is in trouble, you step up. I sat back, studying this stranger across from me who shared my DNA but none of my values. Here's what I'm willing to do, Jake. Come home. Move back to Franklin County. Work for Henderson Hardware for 1 full year, real work, honest work, at $15 an hour. Prove to me that you understand the value of earning what you have. Show me you can rebuild trust with people you've hurt. Do that, and I'll pay off your debts and help you start over the right way. Jake stared at me like I'd suggested he move to Mars. You want me to work retail? At minimum wage? Dad, I have a college degree. So did I when I started the business. That's completely different. You didn't have options like I do. You didn't have opportunities. What opportunities? You're unemployed, Jake. You're in debt to dangerous people. You have no prospects and no plan beyond running away to Europe with money you haven't earned. I'm not going back to that dead-end town to stock shelves for your entertainment. The mask was coming off now, revealing the contempt that had always been there. My entertainment? This whole thing, it's about control, isn't it? You want to humiliate me, make me crawl back and beg for your approval. Well, forget it. I'd rather figure this out on my own than give you the satisfaction. Jake stood abruptly, throwing his napkin on the table. I thought you'd changed, Dad. I thought maybe success had made you more generous, more understanding. But you're still the same small-minded, controlling bastard who drove me away in the first place. Jake, keep your money. Keep your conditions. Keep your pathetic little hardware empire. I don't need any of it. He stormed out, leaving me alone with 2 half-eaten steaks and a $200 dinner bill. I sat there for a long moment, feeling something I hadn't expected, relief. My son had just shown me exactly who he'd chosen to become. And for the first time in 3 years, I felt completely at peace with my response. The flight home gave me 5 hours to think, and by the time I landed in Columbus, my mind was clear. Jake had made his choice, again. Just like 3 years ago, when faced with accountability, he'd chosen to run. The difference was, this time I wasn't surprised, and I wasn't heartbroken. I was disappointed, sure, but not broken. The next morning, I walked into Henderson Hardware and found Mary Chen updating the quarterly reports. She looked up as I approached her desk, reading something in my expression. How did it go? She asked gently. Mary had been with me through the worst of it 3 years ago. She knew what this trip to California had meant to me. Exactly how I expected it to go, once I was honest with myself. She nodded, understanding more than I gave her credit for. What happens now? I pulled out the chair across from her desk, the same chair where I'd sat 3 years ago, calculating how to survive Jake's betrayal. I want to set up a scholarship fund. The Jake Henderson Memorial Scholarship for Business Ethics. Mary's eyebrows shot up. Memorial? Is he? No, he's fine. But the son I thought I was raising? That boy died the day he stole from our employees and walked away. It's time I stopped pretending otherwise. We spent the next 2 hours working out the details. $15,000, the exact amount Jake had asked for, would go into an endowment fund administered through Franklin County Community College. The scholarship would go to students from working-class families who demonstrated both academic merit and strong ethical character. Recipients would be chosen not just based on grades, but on community service, work history, and letters of recommendation that spoke to their integrity. The first recipient should be Tommy Rodriguez's daughter, I told Mary. Tommy had stayed with me through the dark days after Jake's theft, working extra hours without complaint while I scrambled to make payroll. His daughter Maria was a junior now, straight-A student, working 2 part-time jobs to save for college. Mr. Henderson, Mary said, reviewing the paperwork. This is going to help a lot of young people. Good. They deserve a chance to prove what they can build with honest work and family support. That evening, I drove out to Miller's Pond, the same spot where I'd taken Jake fishing when he was 12. He'd complained then about having to bait his own hook, about how boring it was to sit still and wait. I tried to explain that patience was part of fishing, part of life, but he'd never gotten it. He'd wanted instant results, immediate gratification. Sitting on that same weathered dock, watching the sun set over water that looked exactly the same as it had 15 years ago, I thought about fatherhood and the lies we tell ourselves. I'd spent 3 years believing that love meant keeping the door open for Jake's return, no matter what. That being a good father meant forgiving unconditionally, accepting any terms he offered, just to have him back in my life. But watching him in that Beverly Hills restaurant, seeing the contempt in his eyes when I offered him honest work, hearing him call my life's work a pathetic little empire, I'd finally understood the difference between love and enabling. Love sometimes means saying no. Love sometimes means watching your child face the consequences of their choices, even when those consequences are painful. Love sometimes means accepting that the person you raised might choose to become someone you don't recognize, and that protecting others from that person's damage is more important than protecting that person from reality. I'd offered Jake everything that mattered: honest work, a chance to rebuild trust, a path back to the family and community he'd abandoned. He'd rejected it all because it required effort, humility, and time. He'd wanted the reward without the work, forgiveness without change, my money without my values. That wasn't love he was asking for. That was transaction. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Dad, I've been thinking about our conversation. Maybe we can work something out. Call me." I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Jake would keep trying, probably escalating to phone calls, maybe even showing up in Franklin County when his situation in California got desperate enough. But I was done negotiating with someone who saw my love as weakness and my success as his birthright. The next morning, I had the "and son" part of the old sign completely sandblasted away from the building's brick facade. Henderson Hardware stood alone now, clean and honest. At the ribbon cutting for our 5th location that fall, Mayor Patterson gave a speech about family businesses that endure through generations. Some legacies, I told the crowd afterward, aren't about blood. They're about values. They're about the people who show up, who do the work, who keep the promises that matter. Maria Rodriguez was in that crowd, wearing the Henderson Hardware polo shirt she'd earned through her summer internship. She'd be starting college in the spring with the help of the scholarship that bore Jake's name, not to honor him, but to honor what he could have been. I had employees who felt like family, customers who trusted me with their biggest projects, and investments that would provide security for decades to come. I had a community that respected what I'd built, and young people like Maria who were eager to learn what I'd learned about turning setbacks into comebacks. I didn't have my son back. But I had something more valuable: a life rebuilt on my own terms, success earned through integrity, and the deep satisfaction of knowing that when tested by betrayal, I'd chosen to become stronger rather than bitter. Some fathers get to pass down family businesses to grateful children. Others get to pass down something more important: the proof that principled people can rebuild from anything, even the worst kind of heartbreak. That legacy belonged to me alone, and no one could steal it.